Some stories aren't just about a divorce or a job. They are about collapse endurance and ultimately how a woman reclaims her own voice. I never imagined the day would come when my private life would be turned into office entertainment, when my pain would be wagered on like some kind of joke. But when I hit rock bottom, I chose to stand up. And from that very moment, I discovered a new path, the path that led me from victim to fighter, and finally to a free woman. This is my story. Chapter 1, Public Humiliation. I will never forget that feeling. Heather's shrill voice echoed across the office as if she were holding a megaphone in her hand. "Sarah, your ex-husband is calling again." Every time I heard those words, my heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. All eyes immediately turned toward me. Fingers froze on keyboards. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I no longer felt like an employee. I had become a free entertainment show for the entire company. That time, the call wasn't even from my ex-husband. It was my lawyer, David, calling to discuss child custody procedures. But Heather didn't care. For her, the truth didn't matter. What she wanted was a scene dramatic enough to capture the whole office's attention. All I could do was grip my phone tightly and whisper, "Could you just take a message for me?" But Heather was already gone, probably off to reapply her lipstick, preparing for the next attack. When my divorce began 8 months ago, I had promised myself I would keep everything private. I wanted to walk into the office looking polished, composed, flawless. I wanted everyone to believe I was strong, that I could separate my personal life from work. I tried my best sharp blazers, perfectly applied lipstick, a poker face mask. But Heather saw right through it. She was like a shark that smelled blood. The moment she sensed my vulnerability, she never missed a chance to sink her teeth in. The first time she shouted about my phone call, I naively thought it was just a mistake. I blushed, stammering an explanation to my coworkers that it was just paperwork. But Heather gave me a cold look, a smirk curling her lips, and in her syrupy voice said, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you didn't miss any important calls." From then on, she repeated the performance every day, each time more cruel than the last. I wanted to stay silent, but I couldn't escape the prying eyes of the entire office. Janet from accounting began looking at me with pity, as if I were a terminal cancer patient. Marcus from IT patted my shoulder every morning, his voice full of concern. "You okay, Sarah?" Even Mr. Henderson, my boss, started speaking to me in a careful, hesitant tone, as if one wrong word might cause me to shatter. That sense of isolation hurt even more than Heather's words. I felt myself slowly being cast into the role of the pitiful woman in their eyes. The crowd in the office had turned into an invisible audience, and Heather was the cruel master of ceremonies, controlling all the attention. I knew I was losing control. Many afternoons I sat in my car crying until I had no tears left, then wiped away the smeared mascara, forcing myself back into my cold, composed mask before walking into the office again. But Heather was always waiting like a predator that never tired. Every time she opened her mouth, I felt my carefully constructed mask crack a little more. At that time, I didn't know that Heather's cruelty was only just beginning, and soon she would set into motion a game whose ending she could never have predicted. Chapter 2. Character setup and conflict divorce was already painful enough, but what drained me was how Heather turned that private agony into a public spectacle. At 38, I had weathered many ups and downs, but I never imagined that a 24-year-old receptionist could control the entire atmosphere of the office with just a few venom-laced words. Heather always appeared at the reception desk with her glossy blonde curls, flawless makeup, and a smile as bright as sunshine. But behind that smile lurked a chilling cunning. She was like a little queen who had built herself a throne out of the reception counter, the place everyone had to pass by. With just one sweetly spoken sentence, Heather could spread gossip across the office faster than an internal email. And me, I'm Sarah, a project manager who had been with the company for 3 years. I used to be the picture of stability, hardworking, trusted by my boss, the one who organized warm birthday parties with colleagues. I had a family, a child, a place in life. But when my marriage collapsed, everything crumbled with it. Divorce didn't just divide assets and custody, it stripped away the strength I'd tried so hard to hide. And Heather wasted no time turning that into her weapon. To my coworkers, Heather was the pretty girl, sharp-tongued but lively. Most thought she was harmless, just someone who liked to talk loudly and joke around. But to me, Heather was a predator. She had an uncanny instinct for weakness, and when she saw me trying to hold myself together after a shattered marriage, she exploited it to the fullest. I still remember one time when my lawyer called to discuss asset division. Heather leapt up from her chair, placed a hand dramatically on her chest, and shouted across the lobby, "Sarah, another lawyer is calling you. How many lawyers does it take to handle your divorce?" The whole office chuckled. I froze, struggling to swallow back the tears rising in my throat. All I could do was lower my head, mumble a thank you, and retreat to my desk. In that moment, I felt so small. I could have vanished into thin air, yet the humiliation was magnified to the point of being impossible to hide. What stung more was the shift in my coworkers' eyes. Once they had seen me as a teammate, someone reliable. But since Heather began parading my private life in public, they started looking at me with curiosity, mixed with pity. No one said it outright, but I could feel the invisible line forming. I was no longer a colleague. I was the divorced woman, an invisible label, yet unbearably heavy. I knew what Heather wanted. She thrived on attention, on turning others into her entertainment so she could shine brighter. And to her, I was the perfect prey, exhausted, unraveling, clinging to a facade of strength while broken inside. Like a predator, Heather could smell blood. I tried more than once to confront her directly. One morning, I gathered every ounce of courage, walked to the reception desk, my voice trembling but firm. "Heather, this is personal. I need you to keep it private, not broadcast it. That's the bare minimum of respect." She lifted her head, her bright blue eyes glittering like glass. Then she smiled, tilting her head as if she were bestowing kindness. "Oh, Sarah, I'm only trying to help you. You seem so distracted lately. I worry you'll miss something important. Think of me as just giving you a little reminder." Her words might have sounded caring at first, but her tone dripped with mockery. I walked away, heart heavy. She had turned false concern into a silent slap that stung worse than any shout. And the worst part, the people around us seemed to believe in her polite facade. Day by day, Heather turned my private life into a spectacle. Every phone call, every meeting with my lawyer became a headline she casually announced like breaking news. I tried to keep my mask of composure intact, but inside I knew I was losing balance. Heather had found my weakness, and I was trapped in her snare. I didn't know then that these dark days were only the beginning. Heather's cruelty would push me to the edge, and from that edge, a part of me I had never known would awaken. Chapter 3. Escalation of bullying. The days that followed felt like a script on repeat, except the cruelty Heather unleashed grew harsher with each passing week. If before she only publicly announced my personal phone calls now, Heather had begun turning the entire office into her stage for mockery. One morning, as I waited for coffee in the break room, I heard her voice carrying down the hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's still fighting over child support, you know. Poor thing, what kind of man refuses to support his own kid?" I nearly dropped the cup in my hand. My heart pounded wildly, cold sweat trickled down my spine. I wanted to scream that she was lying, that the battle between Tom and me wasn't about money, but about time with our child. But when I stepped out, all I saw was Linda from HR forcing a nervous smile, while Heather looked at me with sparkling eyes as if she had just claimed victory. That was the first time I felt the humiliation wasn't confined to gossip anymore. It had seeped into the way people actually saw me. Linda averted her gaze, pretending to be busy with the files in her hands. I bent down to pick up the shards of the cup, trying to hide my trembling hands. Heather knelt beside me casually, her voice sweet as sugar cane Sarah. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Divorce is so hard, especially with a child involved. The word sounded supportive, but I knew better. It was a sharpened knife she stabbed in front of everyone. The whole office gradually shifted in their attitude toward me. Janet, who once joined me for lunch, now looked at me with pity, as if waiting for me to collapse. Marcus stopped by my desk every day with a sympathetic pat on the shoulder, making me feel more like a terminal patient than a normal employee. Even Mr. Henderson, who once praised me as the backbone of the project, now spoke to me in a careful, hushed tone, afraid any word might send me into tears. I felt trapped inside a glass cage. Every action was watched, every moment of weakness magnified. I had once thought of work as the one place I could cling to for peace, but now it had become a battlefield. There was nowhere left to hide. Every lunch break, I sat in my car staring at the steering wheel while tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. I tried to keep my mask of cold composure intact, but every time Heather opened her mouth, that mask cracked a little more. I knew I was losing control, and the scariest part was that Heather knew it too. I realized she was playing a game more sophisticated than simple teasing. Heather didn't just want me embarrassed, she wanted me broken. Her deliberate whispers, the shifting glances of coworkers all worked together to make me feel like a burden. And once she had planted that seed, all she had to do was wait for me to collapse for her amusement. The escalation made each workday feel like stepping into an underground courtroom. No one needed to say a word. Their eyes alone told me I was on trial. I didn't know how long my endurance would last. I only knew that every minute in the office felt like torture. There were nights I lay awake in bed, tossing and turning, my mind spinning with the same question. Why does she hate me so much? What did I do to deserve this? But the answer never came. Only one truth was clear: Heather wasn't stopping, and I was being pushed closer and closer to the edge. I didn't know then how much longer I could hold on. All I knew was that if things continued one day, I really would break down in the middle of the office. But fate always has its way of arranging things, and I had no idea that the lowest point of my life would also mark the beginning of a revenge plan I could never have imagined. Chapter 4. The Betting Pool. I thought I had already grown used to Heather's cruelty. I believed nothing she did could shock me anymore. But then, on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon, I stumbled upon something that froze my heart. I had only meant to stop by the copy room to print documents for a meeting. The copier whirred loudly, and a stack of papers sat forgotten on the tray. I picked them up, assuming they were just internal memos. But the longer I looked, the blurrier my vision became. It wasn't a work report. It was a list titled, Sarah's Breakdown Betting Pool. I stood frozen. The words burned into my eyes. Crying in the bathroom. 2 weeks. Heather, $10. Quitting without notice. 1 month. Marcus, $5. Fired for poor performance. 6 weeks. Linda, 15 years. Complete mental breakdown. 3 weeks. Anonymous, $20. I counted 12 names. 12 people I had once trusted, shared birthday cake with, sat beside at team lunches. People who knew my mother's birthday, knew which school my child went to, knew I liked my coffee black without sugar, and now they were betting on how I would fall apart. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. It was as if all my tears had dried up, leaving behind only razor-sharp focus. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the entire sheet. Then I folded it neatly and slipped it into my bag. As I walked back to my desk, all I saw was the pale white glare of the overhead lights. The chatter and laughter of my coworkers rang in my ears, strange, bitter, foreign. They were no longer people I knew. They had become spectators, and I was the entertainment in their betting game. I knew what I had to do. I walked straight to HR. My hand clenched the paper so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I placed the photocopy on Patricia's desk, the head of HR, and said, my voice calm, in an eerie way, I want to file a workplace harassment complaint. Patricia stared at the paper for a long moment. Her eyes behind her glasses scanned line by line. I waited for outrage, for sympathy, or at least some assurance that I would be protected. But instead she simply sighed, then looked up and said in a flat, measured tone, as if she'd just read a bad joke, "Sarah, I understand you're going through a difficult time. But this might just be office banter. Maybe they were trying to lighten the mood, or perhaps it's a misguided way of showing concern." I blinked in disbelief. "Concern they're betting on when I'll have a nervous breakdown, and you call that concern?" Patricia tilted her head, her voice dripping with false gentleness. "Sometimes people use humor to cope with uncomfortable situations. Maybe you're misinterpreting it." It felt like an invisible knife stabbed straight through my chest. The one person I had hoped would protect me had dismissed my pain as nothing more than banter, a harmless joke. In the end, I left HR with nothing but a glossy pamphlet titled Mindfulness and Stress Management, a meaningless flyer in place of justice. That was the moment I knew I was utterly alone. Heather knew I had tried to fight back, but she also knew HR would never lift a finger. The next morning, her victorious smile shone brighter than the office lights. As I walked past, she leaned in and whispered, "Good morning, Sarah. You look resilient today." It might have sounded like a compliment, but I heard the real message: I can destroy you anytime I want, and no one will stop me. That night, I sat in my empty apartment, staring at the cold walls. Tom had taken most of the furniture when we split. I felt stripped bare of possessions, of dignity, of strength. But when I looked again at the photo on my phone, the betting pool scrawled in my coworker's handwriting, one thought flashed through my mind. If they wanted to see me break, then I would show them the opposite. I wouldn't run. I would fight. I didn't yet know how, but for the first time in months, I felt a fire ignite inside me, and that fire would lead me to a plan Heather could never have anticipated. Chapter 5. HR's Failure. The Depth of Despair. I had once hoped that presenting clear evidence would change everything, but when I walked out of HR with nothing more than a pamphlet on mindfulness skills in my hand, I knew that hope was gone. No one was going to save me. No policy stood on my side. All I had left was myself. The next morning, Heather appeared at the reception desk earlier than usual. The moment she saw me walk in, she flashed a dazzling smile and cooed sweetly, "Good morning, Sarah. Doing okay today?" To others, it sounded like a polite greeting, but I heard the real meaning. "I know you tried to report me, and I know nothing will happen." I walked past, keeping my face expressionless, though inside it felt like a boulder pressed down on my chest. Heather no longer needed to hide her triumph. She knew I was cornered. Her smile was the exclamation mark on a cruel truth. I wasn't just the target. I was the loser in the fight for justice. Day by day, I felt more isolated. Coworkers began avoiding me as though my misery were contagious. None of them wanted to side with me because everyone understood what that meant, becoming Heather's next victim. Every averted glance, every half-hearted nod was a reminder that I was fighting this battle alone. After work, I no longer had the energy to go anywhere. I went back to my empty apartment and sat for hours in the dark. The furniture Tom had taken left only scraps behind. The silence was so heavy that even the ticking of the clock made me want to cry. I looked around the barren room and saw my life reflected in it, abandoned, hollow, and cold. I began suffering from insomnia. Each night I tossed and turned my mind, replaying scenes of humiliation at the office. Heather shouting my name, the bursts of laughter, Janet's pitying gaze, Patricia's indifferent tone. They looped together into a cycle of torment, wearing me down. More than once I wondered if I didn't wake up tomorrow, would anyone even care? But even in that pit of despair, a small part of me struggled to fight back. I thought of my child's face of the nights I held them close, whispering promises that Mommy would always be strong. I couldn't collapse. If I gave up, Heather would win, and my child would grow up remembering a mother who failed, who couldn't even protect herself. That thought hurt more than all the humiliation combined. I knew I had to choose: either quit my job and start over somewhere else, or find a way to fight back. Leaving seemed easier, but I would carry the wound forever, the scar of helplessness, haunted by Heather's smirk. That night, I sat by the window staring down at the glittering lights of the city. A strange thought flickered inside me. If Heather had turned my pain into her game, could I turn her cruelty into a trap that she herself would fall into? At first, it was just a vague notion, but the more I thought, the clearer it became. I needed a plan. I needed someone who could help me bring it to life. I scrolled through my contacts until I stopped at a name I hadn't seen in years. Mel Rodriguez, my college roommate, the one who once hacked into the grading system just to prove she could. A tech genius with a wild creative streak, and the only person I knew capable of making a crazy plan real. I took a deep breath and sent a simple message. Mel, I need your help. Something insane. Are you still good with computers? I didn't know then that this message would open an entirely new chapter of my life. A chapter Heather could never see coming. Chapter 6. The Decision to Fight Back. The message I sent Mel was only a few words long, but that very night my phone rang. A familiar laugh came from the other end, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to have someone truly on my side. Sarah Chin, after all these years without a word, you call me in the middle of the night to ask about computers? Mel chuckled her voice, half teasing, half excited, just like back in our college days. I stayed silent for a few seconds, and then like a dam breaking everything poured out. I told her about the public phone calls, the pitying looks, the cruel betting pool, the failed HR meeting. My words came out broken, choked with tears, but Mel never interrupted. She only let out sharp bursts of outrage now and then. Oh my God, what a bastard. Unbelievable. When I finally finished, the line went quiet for a long moment. I heard the sound of her fingers tapping on a keyboard, and then her voice lowered tight with restrained anger. Sarah, this isn't petty bullying anymore. This is psychological warfare. She's trying to destroy you, and HR is letting it happen. I swallowed hard. I know, but I can't quit. I need the insurance for my kids. I don't have anywhere else to go. Mel sighed, but then her tone sharpened, shifting from friend to strategist. Then we don't defend anymore. We attack. Not with violence, not with arguments, but with the very thing she worships most, ambition and vanity. I let out a bitter laugh. Sounds like something out of a movie. So what if it does? You think people like her don't deserve to fall into a trap? Mel paused, then added, have you ever really thought about what Heather wants? A receptionist's paycheck isn't enough for her. What she craves is promotion entry into the glamorous world recognition. I recalled all those times Heather bragged in the break room about how she'd soon land a real job at a big corporation, how she deserved to be an account manager instead of stuck at a reception desk. My heart beat faster as I nodded. You're right. She always acts like she's too good for her current role. Mel gave a soft, satisfied laugh. Perfect. Then we'll give her an opportunity she can't refuse. A dream job, a fat paycheck, a doorway into the shiny world she fantasizes about. And once she's grasping it with both hands, we'll slam it shut right in her face. A vision flashed in my mind, Heather picking up one of my calls to humiliate me, but this time she'd be the one humiliated, exposed for everyone to see. For the first time, I felt something ignite inside me. Not just anger, but hope. Are you sure, Mel, I don't want to break the law? I just want her to taste exactly what she's done to me. Sarah, relax. I'll handle the tech. Everything stays legal. We're just holding up a mirror, and she'll be the one to walk into it. I laughed, then a real laugh, the first in months. It felt like gasoline had been poured on the fire inside me. At last, I had an ally, a plan, and a spark for revenge. That night, I didn't sleep. But this time, it wasn't from fear or torment. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, heart pounding with anticipation, imagining the moment Heather realized she'd been fooled. For the first time in months, I was excited for tomorrow. I knew that from the moment I sent Mel that message, everything had changed. The game was no longer in Heather's control, and she could never imagine that her own cruelty had awakened in me someone she never saw coming. Chapter 7, Building the Phantom Company. The next morning, I met Mel at a small cafe downtown. The air was crisp, autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalk, as if everything around us was bracing for change. I arrived 10 minutes early, clutching a hot latte, my heart pounding. When Mel walked in, it felt like seeing a stronger version of the youth I had long forgotten. She still had her edgy pixie haircut, round glasses, and sharp eyes that glowed with energy. But instead of the rebellious college roommate who once hacked the university system for fun, Mel was now a confident, successful businesswoman. She set her sleek laptop on the table, looked at me, and smiled. "All right, tell me everything about Heather." I began describing. The way Heather bragged about being better than her position, how she always said, "Soon, I'll be working somewhere that matches my talent," and the stories she fabricated to prove her connections. I told Mel about Heather secretly printing resumes in the office, even editing her CV during work hours. Mel nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Ambitious, arrogant, and loves to show off. "Perfect," Mel murmured, her eyes never leaving the screen. In less than an hour, the laptop displayed a professional-looking website for River and Wallace Capital. A dark blue logo, glossy stock photos of people in suits shaking hands in elegant boardrooms. The whole thing radiated prestige and wealth. I stared wide-eyed. "Oh my God, Mel, you did that so fast," she laughed. 12 years in web development, Sarah. Spinning up a phantom company is as easy as sipping coffee. The real trick is making it irresistible to her. She continued her showcase of fake LinkedIn profile for Janet Morrison, an experienced HR director, complete with a stock photo of a stern-looking middle-aged woman. Supporting social media accounts, cross-linked references for credibility. Mel even registered a virtual phone line that could take calls and reroute them to her. I was both impressed and unsettled. It all looked so real. Had I not known better, I would have believed River and Wallace Capital was a legitimate firm. "The dream job is coming," Mel said, typing the final lines. "We'll post an opening senior client relations manager salary, $85, $95 plus bonus. Just enough to make her feel she's good enough, but not so high it raises suspicion." I couldn't help but laugh quietly. Never in my life did I imagine I'd be sitting in a cafe plotting revenge by creating a fake company. Yet seeing Mel's enthusiasm lifted a weight off me. For the first time in months, I felt the balance of power shifting. "You think she'll take the bait?" I asked. Mel glanced up, her eyes gleaming. "Sarah, trust me. People like Heather always do. Blind ambition is a fatal flaw. All we have to do is dangle the bait." She quickly drafted an anonymous email posing as a contact in the professional network. The message was simple. "I saw your profile and noticed a company hiring for the perfect role. Here's the link. Great opportunity, you should apply." As the words appeared on the screen, I shivered. The trap was set. You see, Mel explained the best part is that everything Heather does after this will be her choice. Submitting the application, going to the interview, bragging, quitting her job, all by her own hand. We just build the stage. She'll play the lead in her own tragedy. I sat there silently for a moment, then burst into laughter, a sound that came from deep within my chest. Maybe this was what it felt like to reclaim some of the power I had lost for so long. That night when I returned to my apartment, it didn't feel as hollow as before. In my mind, the images grew sharper, Heather's eyes sparkling as she read the interview invite. Heather smugly announcing her new job to the office, Heather strutting out with a box in her hands, confident she had won. And then, Heather confronting the raw truth. I whispered softly to myself, "This game. Finally, it's my turn." Chapter 8. The Fake Interview. Heather exposes herself. Just 2 days after Mel sent the anonymous email, Heather took the bait. I saw it with my own eyes. She printed her resume on glossy cardstock, even using our company's letterhead as if it were her golden ticket proving her worth. She stacked the pages neatly, smiling radiantly as she held them, completely unaware that she was stepping right into an elaborate trap. Mel scheduled the online interview for an evening after work. The reasoning was simple. Because the position deals with high-profile clients, discretion is a top priority. Heather nodded eagerly, accepting without hesitation. I sat in my car in the parking garage, phone on speaker, my heart hammering. On screen, Mel appeared in the role of Janet Morrison, the HR director. She wore elegant glasses, her voice lowered to a firm, decisive tone with a hint of northeastern professionalism. Had I not known, I might have believed it was a genuine interview. "Hello, Heather. Your application really impressed us," Mel said. "Can you tell me about a difficult situation with a colleague that you successfully handled?" Heather lit up instantly. She sat straight, a confident smile spreading across her face, and launched into her monologue. "Oh, at my current company, I once had to deal with an employee going through a divorce. She brought her personal problems into work and dragged down the office atmosphere. I took it upon myself to make her understand that the job had to come first, and I believe thanks to me, the workplace became more positive. In my car, I clenched the steering wheel so tightly, my hands ached. Even in a job interview, Heather used my humiliation as her victory story." Mel kept a calm expression, nodding. "Natural leadership skills. Very impressive. And how did management respond?" "Oh, they supported me completely. In fact, I'm often the face of the office. I set the tone for communication with clients and colleagues. I believe I have a natural gift for external relations." Heather went on bragging, even spilling confidential information, client names, contract details, even salary figures. I held my breath, both horrified and furious. She wasn't just trampling on my dignity, she was willing to expose company secrets just to glorify herself. The interview stretched past 20 minutes, and the longer it went, the more Heather inflated her image. She painted herself as a star, unjustly stifled in exceptional talent yet to be recognized. I felt both nauseated and bitterly amused listening to her. Finally, Mel wrapped it up. "Heather, we think you're an excellent fit. If you agree, you could start as early as next Monday. We'll send the formal offer tonight." I watched Heather's eyes sparkle like fireworks. She could barely contain her excitement. "Yes, I'll hand in my resignation tomorrow." When the interview ended, Mel called me back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You heard it all. She actually bragged about bullying you, thinking it was a management skill." "Sarah, I've never seen anyone dig their own grave this quickly." I leaned back in my seat, exhaling deeply. A strange mix swirled inside me, anger, but also relief. At least now I had proof that Heather wasn't just cruel, she was reckless, willing to betray the company just to feed her ego. The next day, I sat at my desk, pretending to focus on spreadsheets, but my real attention was on Heather. She kept checking her phone, a dreamy smile on her face. When Mr. Henderson walked by, she sprang up, eagerly striking up conversation, as though she were already preparing to climb higher. I saw a pride in her eyes, the kind of pride an actress has before stepping into the spotlight. Right then, Mel's message popped up on my screen, Phase 2 complete. The trap is shut. I smiled a real smile, the first in months, because this time I knew for certain the stage was set, and Heather was about to play the lead role in the tragedy she had so blindly chosen for herself. Chapter 9. Farewell, Tour, Goodbye, Peasants. News of Heather's departure spread faster than an urgent company-wide email. She didn't keep it secret for even a day. That morning, I saw Heather stride into the office with sparkling eyes, her hair neatly tied back, carrying a stack of pink pastry boxes. Her expression was as if she were bringing salvation to the entire office. "Good morning, everyone," Heather announced in the middle of the lobby, her voice ringing out like a graduation speech. "I have exciting news. I've just been hired for an executive position at River and Wallace Capital. They personally invited me, and I'll be starting next Monday." The room fell into an awkward silence. A few coworkers clapped half-heartedly, others forced weak smiles. I caught the subtle glances they exchanged, but Heather either didn't notice or pretended not to. She set the pastry boxes on a table and opened them, revealing cupcakes topped with shimmering silver frosting. Each one was wrapped in paper printed with the words in ornate script, "Goodbye, Peasants." The air instantly grew heavy. Janet from accounting frowned, picked up a cupcake, read the wrapper, and quietly set it down. Marcus gave a nervous half-laugh and muttered, "Peasants." "Seriously," Heather giggled, her tone sharp beneath its sugary coating. "Oh, it's just a joke, like Marie Antoinette, saying farewell to the old court as I step into a new palace." No one bothered to correct her that the comparison was ridiculous and tasteless. They just stayed silent, letting Heather continue her performance. Throughout the morning, Heather turned her farewell into a self-congratulatory tour. In accounting, she said, "I'll miss everyone's diligence. Not everyone can handle such detailed tasks, while I, of course, am aiming for higher strategic levels." In customer service, she declared, "I hope my replacement can maintain the standards I've established." And in marketing, Heather pronounced working here gave me a few basic concepts. But I'm eager to see what real marketing looks like at an executive level. The words sounded like compliments, but everyone understood the contempt behind them. I watched as my coworkers' expressions shifted from surprise to irritation to silent endurance. The entire office seemed trapped in a farce everyone wished would end. By noon, Heather entered the break room where I sat hurriedly eating a salad. She approached, holding a small silver-wrapped gift box. Setting it on my table, she smiled brightly, but her eyes gleamed with mockery. "Sarah, I wanted to give you something before I go. A little gift to help you through this difficult time." I opened it, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Inside was a book, Emotional Resilience, How to Recover from Life's Failures. A page had been bookmarked. Chapter 3. When Personal Problems Affect Work Performance. Heather leaned closer, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "I think this will be useful for you. Don't let personal emotions drag down your work anymore. Hopefully, from now on, you'll be able to cry in silence." I heard a few stifled chuckles mixed with uneasy breaths. My face burned, not from shame this time, but from the certainty that she was digging her own grave. I smiled softly, setting the book aside, and replied just loud enough. "Steady and calm, I believe. Everything will happen exactly as it should." Heather hesitated, perhaps unsettled by my unexpected composure, but she quickly regained her smugness and continued her pompous farewell tour. By the end of the day, Heather left the office carrying her small box of belongings, waving grandly one last time. "Goodbye, Peasants. See you again when I'm at the top." The elevator door slid shut. The office felt lighter, almost cleansed. But for me, the waiting wasn't over, because I knew in just a few days Heather would face the hardest fall of her life, and I would be there to witness every moment. Chapter 10. The Climax. First day at the Phantom Company. That Monday, the city felt strangely new. The sky was crystal clear, the breeze cool and fresh. I sat in a cafe across from the high-rise where River and Wallace Capital had been staged, my heart pounding wildly. Beside me, Mel had her laptop open, headphones plugged in. She took a sip of latte and quipped, half joking, half serious, "Ready for the show," at exactly 8:47. Heather's silver Honda Civic pulled up to the entrance. I saw her in a pristine white blazer hair in a tight bun, lips painted bright red. She checked her reflection one last time, straightened her faux tie, and stepped out with her leather briefcase. Every movement radiated confidence, as if she were striding into the dazzling new chapter of her career. Mel pointed at her laptop screen, which displayed the building's public security feed. "There she is." We watched Heather walk in, smiling at the security guard confidently, explaining that it was her first day at work. The guard called to confirm, then nodded and led her into the elevator. I pictured her footsteps down the 14th floor hallway, the temporary nameplate, River and Wallace Capital, neatly mounted on the door, the conference room lit desks, arranged with fabricated documents. On her personal desk sat a manila folder with a handwritten note, "Welcome, Heather." "Wishing you a successful start," Mel smirked slyly. "Wait for it. The best part is coming." 15 minutes later, Heather reappeared from the elevator. The confident air had vanished, replaced by confusion. She paused at the building's entrance, pulling out her phone and dialing repeatedly. Mel tapped a key and opened the feed. "Listen," the line crackled. "This number is no longer in service." Heather hung up and tried again. The same automated message. Her face began to twist with frustration. I saw her rush back to the security desk, speaking quickly. The guard shook his head, checked his computer, then looked at her apologetically. "There's no company named River and Wallace Capital in this building, ma'am." Heather froze on the spot. I sipped my coffee, my heartbeat racing with exhilaration. Every humiliation I had endured was being paid back moment by moment. Then came the envelope. Heather tore it open, expecting onboarding documents, but I saw her face pale as she read the contents, the printed betting pool every colleague who had wagered on the date of my breakdown. At the bottom, handwritten in black ink, "Perhaps next time, don't turn someone else's pain into entertainment." Heather's eyes darted around as though someone might be watching her hidden in plain sight. She even glanced toward the cafe where I sat, but her gaze slid past without lingering. I saw her lips tremble as she whispered something I couldn't hear. Mel leaned close, murmuring in my ear, "Now she knows what it feels like to be made into a spectacle." Heather slumped onto the building steps, hands shaking as she dialed call after call, friends, family who knew. Each one ended the same, leaving her face more twisted, more desperate. I could see the panic, the humiliation, the hopelessness settling over her. Eventually, she stood clutching the envelope and hurried back to her car. But instead of driving off, she sat inside for nearly half an hour, crying and screaming into her phone. And in that moment, I realized this was the first time Heather had tasted the feeling of the world turning against her. Mel closed her laptop with a long breath. "It's done. This fall will haunt her for a long time." I stayed still, staring out at the cafe window, flooded with both satisfaction and release. There had been no shouting match, no public confrontation, just a carefully staged play that let Heather collapse under the weight of her own ambition. As she finally drove away, her posture shrunken, no longer strutting with pride, I smiled. Not a cruel, vengeful smile, but the quiet smile of someone who had reclaimed control. That day I knew one thing for certain: Heather would never forget this fall. And I, after months of being the office punchline, had finally delivered the answer she deserved. Chapter 11. Aftershocks and ripples news that Heather had landed a job only to suddenly vanish from her new company spread faster than the morning headlines. Within a week, the whispers returned to our old office. No one asked me directly, but I heard the hallway murmurs. I heard that company doesn't even exist. She got scammed. Maybe it's karma. I didn't need confirmation. Just by looking into my coworkers' eyes, I knew everyone understood that Heather had finally paid the price. What surprised me more was the shift in atmosphere. The once heavy, tense office seemed to breathe easier after the storm. Linda from accounting began laughing more often. Marcus stopped hiding behind his headphones and played music softly enough for everyone to share. Even Mr. Henderson seemed lighter, no longer carrying that nervous tension every time he stepped out of his office. One day I caught Jenny, the young accountant, smiling as she poured coffee. She leaned close and whispered, "Can you believe one person made the whole office feel suffocating? It feels completely different now." I nodded, feeling as though fresh air had finally returned after months in a sealed room. But what shook me most was when Marcus came to my desk one afternoon. He fidgeted, holding a USB cable in his hands like a nervous prop. "Sarah," he said, his voice lower than usual, "I owe you an apology." I blinked, waiting. Marcus continued, "I knew what Heather was doing to you. The phone calls, the rumors. All of it. I saw it, but I stayed silent. I was scared that if I spoke up, I'd be next. I was a coward, but I need you to know I really am sorry." For a moment, I was speechless. For months, I had believed no one cared that I had fought completely alone. Hearing his words, I felt something soften in my chest. I exhaled slowly. I understand. Heather was good at turning people into spectators, but hearing the truth even late is still a comfort. After that, more confessions began surfacing. Jenny admitted Heather once spread a rumor that she was having an affair with a client. Angela from customer service revealed Heather had blocked an important call and then blamed her. Linda, the eldest in the department, had tears in her eyes as she recalled Heather hinting that she should retire before she lost all her value. I realized I had never been Heather's only victim. She had poisoned the entire workplace, but I was simply her heaviest target. Those confessions left me both bitter and strangely relieved. At last, we were acknowledging it aloud we had all suffered under the same toxic person. The office atmosphere shifted day by day. People began talking more openly, sharing honestly. Short coffee breaks turned into small circles where we recounted our experiences like an impromptu support group. And I noticed the way my coworkers looked at me had changed. No longer with pity, but with respect. They understood I had survived the storm that had terrified them all. And Heather, occasionally, I heard rumors that she was interviewing here and there. Some said she tried to explain that she had been tricked by a phantom company her colleagues had created. But the more she repeated the story, the more it sounded like an excuse to cover her own foolishness. One recruiter reportedly laughed in her face and asked her to leave. When I heard this, I didn't feel the smug satisfaction I once imagined. Instead, it was relief. Heather had brought her downfall upon herself. I didn't need to do anything more. It was simply karma unavoidable. And in the quiet that now settled over the office, I began to see it clearly. This story wasn't only about Heather's collapse. It was about us, the ones who had been silent for too long, finally learning to speak up to tell the truth and to reclaim our own voices. Chapter 12, Turning Point Number 2, From Revenge to Reform. After Heather vanished from my life, the days in the office suddenly became strangely lighter. No more snickers behind my back, no more sarcastic remarks disguised as kindness. But that peace also left a void. I began to wonder if someone like Heather could run rampant for years without being stopped. What would prevent another Heather from appearing? One evening I sat in front of my computer in my small apartment, fingers resting on the keyboard, the cursor blinking, waiting. And I began to write. Not a complaint letter, not a perfunctory report, but a detailed document, 15 pages long. I recorded everything: the betting pool, the times I was humiliated in public, the way HR ignored evidence. I collected testimonies from coworkers, anyone who had ever been crushed under Heather's weight. Each page was a wound reopened, but instead of bleeding this time, it turned into evidence. I wrote for nights on end, sitting for hours, in the dim light of my desk, lamp hands trembling, but determination unbroken. I wanted to make sure that if one day someone else was treated the way I had been, they would not be left abandoned. When I finished, I saved the file as a PDF, naming it Workplace Harassment, Confidential Report. I used an anonymous email to send it to both HR and the regional management. Just before pressing send, my heart raced to the point of suffocation. But as soon as I clicked, an odd calm washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt I had done something right, not just for myself, but for others too. 2 weeks later, results began to surface. HR scheduled private interviews with each person named in the report. I heard whispers spreading through the halls. Are they really investigating? Finally, someone spoke up. No one knew I had initiated it, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was finally being heard. A month later, I received an email from Henderson Sarah. We'd like to invite you to join the new task force on workplace culture and mental health. Your perspective will be invaluable. I read the line again and again, hardly believing it. Just a few months earlier, I had been the pitiful woman seen as a burden. Now they wanted me to help shape company policy. In the first meetings, I couldn't hide my nerves, but once I began speaking, I felt every eye focused on me. I laid out the need for anonymous reporting channels, for bystander intervention training, for regular surveys, to measure employee well-being. My words weren't abstract theory, they were carved from lived experience. And because of that, they rang louder than any polished presentation. I remember Henderson nodding once, his voice sincere. Your suggestions have opened my eyes. Perhaps we've been far too slow in protecting our employees. In that moment, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt a deep sense of solace. Finally, my pain had meaning. When I left the meeting that day, I paused in the hallway, the same hallway, where Heather once stood to publicly shame me before the entire office. I laid my hand gently on the wall and whispered to myself, no one else will have to endure that again. That was when I realized revenge had only been the beginning. What I truly needed wasn't just to see Heather fall, it was to transform my pain into change. And for the first time, I no longer felt like just a victim. I was a survivor, and more than that, a builder. Chapter 13, The Healing Journey. After everything that happened, I thought I would feel satisfied simply because Heather had paid the price. But in truth, that satisfaction only lasted for a fleeting moment. What remained was an immense emptiness inside me, the accumulation of wounds built over months, even years. I realized that revenge, while gratifying, was not enough to heal. I needed something else, a longer path back to myself. I began therapy. The first time I stepped into Dr. Martinez's office, I was still guarded. I curled up on the sofa, hands clasped tightly, unsure of where to begin. But she listened patiently, her eyes free of judgment or pity. And within a few sessions, I broke down, realizing I had carried the fear of being too much. My entire life, afraid of being a burden, afraid of being seen as weak, afraid of taking up space. You've gotten used to shrinking yourself so others can be comfortable, Dr. Martinez told me. The divorce only exposed the cracks. And Heather, she was the brutal test that forced you to confront your own worth. Her words haunted me. For years, I had lived to please everyone, to keep silent in order to avoid conflict, to carry more than I needed to. And then I had let Heather exploit that pattern, turning it into a weapon against me. I began practicing saying no. At first, only with small things, declining a coffee invite when I didn't want to go, refusing to help someone finish a last-minute report if it wasn't my responsibility. At first, guilt gnawed at me as if I were doing something wrong. But slowly I learned that no wasn't selfish. It was simply a way of defining my boundaries. At work, I changed too. In meetings, I no longer sat silently. I voiced my opinions even when they clashed with the majority. I remember one time when Henderson proposed a plan that seemed unrealistic. I said plainly, I think we should recheck the data. Some of the numbers don't add up. The room turned toward me, and for a moment, nerves fluttered in my chest. But Henderson nodded, ordered a review, and it turned out I was right. That day I walked home with light steps, as though shedding a weight I had carried for years. In my personal life, I began to savor my newfound freedom. Weekend evenings were no longer empty voids. I cooked dinners for myself, sometimes more elaborate than when I had a family. I sat on the balcony watching sunsets spill golden light over the neighbor's garden. I read not escapist novels, but memoirs of women who had walked through loss and discovered strength within themselves. One evening, my daughter Emma looked up at me and said, "Mom, you're different now. You look lighter." I smiled and pulled her close. It was strange how a child could see straight through the masks adults build. Emma could tell I had stopped forcing smiles and had begun to truly smile again. My friendship with Mel also deepened. We no longer just discussed revenge plans. Now our late-night calls were about careers, relationships, and dreams still unfinished. One time Mel joked we should start a consulting firm, Karma Solutions Justice Design for the workplace. I laughed out loud, but inside I thought, maybe. Most importantly, I learned to forgive not Heather, but myself. To forgive the days I was weak, the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken, the nights I cried until my chest ached. I understood now that every one of those moments had been necessary to bring me here. The healing journey wasn't a straight road. There were still mornings when I woke with anxiety, remembering Heather's taunting laugh. But the difference was that now the memory no longer crushed me. It was just a scar. Sometimes it stung, but it also reminded me that I had survived. And in that survival, I found a new kind of strength, the strength of no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. I didn't need to defeat Heather. I didn't need to prove I was enough. I only needed to live a life I felt worthy of. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed I was finally doing just that. Chapter 14, The Bridge and the Destination. 6 months after Heather vanished from the office, I suddenly realized I had traveled much farther than I ever imagined. One afternoon, while tidying my desk drawer, I came across an old piece of paper. It was the very note I had once left in the fake envelope for Heather. Perhaps next time you shouldn't turn someone else's pain into entertainment. I held the paper in my hands, rereading the strokes of my own handwriting. When I wrote those words, I was consumed with rage, desperate to see the one who tormented me finally pay. But now looking back, I no longer felt anger. Instead, there was something strange, lightness, almost tenderness. I realized this note was no longer a message for Heather. It had become a reminder to myself that I once dared to stand up to fight back, and through that, I discovered another version of who I could be. The divorce was finalized as well. Tom and I signed the papers in a sterile office, shaking hands one last time, like business partners dissolving a company. No tears, no theatrics, just closure. As I stepped out into the parking lot, I felt weightless. From that day forward, I no longer had to live in constant tension, no longer had to explain or justify myself. I was free, not free to seek revenge, but free to live my own life. Mornings that once felt like nightmares now became quiet joys. I brewed coffee, sat on my balcony, and watched sunlight spill across the pot of chrysanthemums I had planted myself. I tended to that small garden with simple devotion. Flowers don't judge. Trees don't place bets on my pain. They only ask for light and patience, and in return, they give me peace. What surprised me most was how my perspective on revenge changed. Back then, I believed revenge was the only salvation, the only way to escape humiliation. And yes, it gave me the strength to rise. But as I moved forward, I understood that revenge was just the bridge. It carried me across the abyss of hurt. But the true destination was freedom, peace, and inner strength. I began to treasure the relationships that truly uplifted me. Mel was not just an ally in revenge, but a reminder that women's intelligence and resilience can change the game entirely. My daughter Emma reminded me every day that happiness doesn't come from maintaining a facade, but from daring to live authentically. And I, Sarah, finally learned that my worth does not depend on anyone else's eyes or gossip. Now, when I think of Heather, I no longer shudder. She is just a name in the past, a villain in a chapter long closed. I don't need to know what became of her, nor do I care to hear rumors. The only thing that matters is that I've moved on and become someone new, stronger, steadier, freer than ever. Once, while speaking at a company meeting on policy, I ended with these words. Sometimes the best thing we can do with our pain is turn it into a shield to protect others. The room fell silent for a moment, then heads nodded in unison. And in that moment, I knew my story didn't end with revenge. It had become a seed for change. And as I write these lines, I want to send this message to anyone who has ever been mocked, trampled, or turned into a joke. You are not invisible. You are not powerless. You can rise. You can fight. And most importantly, you can live a life no longer defined by those who hurt you. Revenge gave me the strength to begin. But it was empowerment, self-mastery, freedom, and dignity that became the destination I chose. And that, at last, was the true victory. Looking back, I understand that revenge was only a stepping stone. It was necessary. It gave me the chance to regain control. But what mattered more was not Heather's downfall. It was that I learned how to walk without fear. I learned how to set boundaries, how to say no, how to live a life not to please others, but to make myself truly happy. If you've ever gone through dark moments, if you've ever been hurt by someone, I hope my story reminds you of this. You are not invisible. You are not powerless. You can rise, you can reclaim your power, and you can live a life no longer defined by pain. Because in the end, revenge may bring a fleeting moment of satisfaction, but empowerment, freedom, and inner strength is the true victory.